Phil, we always talk about the kickoff for college football begins at SEC Media Days, but a time-honored tradition that I've done since I was a kid. My dad would go pick up a Phil Steele magazine at either Barnes & Noble or just one of our local bookstores, and it's really kicked off, man, because your magazine's out, and we're ready to talk some college football this morning.
Yeah, I'm always fired up for college football, 365 days of the year. But you know what? This is a fun time of year because you can smell the football. It's almost in the air.
Phil, I think a lot of Arkansas fans immediately jumped to your All-American team, and they feel like that Treylon Burks and some other publications wasn't given the credit that he deserved. Well, you got him as a first-team All-American, and you look at different mock drafts, he is highly projected. Phil, why are you so high on the Warren native Treylon Burks?
Well, I tell you what, it starts off with you got a guy that's got pretty much, he's dynamic, he's big, he's 6'3", 225, he's got speed, and highly productive last year, 820 yards, 16.1 yards per catch. Looked great in the spring, and he's got big hands and probably the leader of the wide receivers there at Arkansas. And he also reported this spring in the best shape of his life, so I'm expecting him to have his best season yet.
When you look around the SEC West, you see a couple of quarterbacks with Matt Corral at Ole Miss and Bo Nix at Auburn with some experience. Then you see quite a few guys that have been on rosters but not played a lot. How do you think these quarterbacks in this Western Division stack up in your mind right now?
Well, not as experienced as last year, but overall, I do think that you've got plenty of talent. You look no further than, start with Alabama. Yeah, they've got a first-year starting quarterback, but you know what? They had one last year. Mac Jones did, I think, pretty good. 41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and Bryce Young was my number 2 rated quarterback coming out of high school. Brings them something a little more athletically, and he's also a very good passer. One guy I really got my eyes on at Texas A&M is Haynes King. I think Haynes King is a dynamic athlete. He's a guy that also throws the football extremely well, and he's got a great supporting cast of running backs and receivers around him. I think Haynes King has a surprisingly good year. LSU's got a couple of good quarterbacks in Miles Brennan and Max Johnson. I was torn to see which one's going to win. I think they're in good shape no matter which one of those two wins the job at LSU. You talked about Matt Corral. We all know about him and Bo Nix. And then you go to Mississippi State this year. Will Rogers, thrown into the fire as a true freshman last year in the Mike Leach offense. Going from a run-based team to a pass-based team, you can expect big numbers from whoever wins the job. And I came away from the spring impressed with Jack Abraham, the Southern Miss transfer. And then, of course, at Arkansas, K.J. Jefferson or Malik Hornsby. You've got a pretty good duel there. And once again, I think no matter which quarterback Arkansas starts, to be in good shape. So overall, I think there's plenty of good talent at the quarterback position. And, 3-4 games into the season, these guys start to look like experienced quarterbacks.
What were your takeaways from K.J. Jefferson's performance in that Missouri game? It's one game, but it was a full, complete game. How much stock should we put into that single performance?
Yeah, it was an impressive game, too, at that. And, when you look at Missouri throwing for 274 yards like that, I put some stock into it because, a lot of times you see quarterbacks in practice, and you don't know how it's going to translate to the field. But it translated to the field for K.J. Jefferson. They put up 48 points and really thought they won the game at the end with him at QB. So I was very impressed with it, and I think it could be a good sign for the future.
Phil Steele with us now. 2021 college football preview is out. Also, philsteele.com. Phil, one of the things you really like about Ole Miss is not only do they have Matt Corral returning, but 9 defensive starters back. Now, Arkansas's got a few key defensive pieces coming back of their own, including Grant Morgan. When Grant made that decision to play another year in Fayetteville, an all-SEC linebacker this past year, you have him as a second-team All-American. How important was that for Barry Odom's defense in 2021?
Oh, huge. In fact, I think they've got one of the top linebacker duos in the country with Grant Morgan and Bumper Poole both back. And if you watch Morgan last year, he was dominant in almost every single game. And the one game he did miss, Bama, they gave up some big-time yards and points, but I thought Morgan and then Catalon in the secondary as well. This is an underrated defense. Arkansas last year gave up 34.9 points per game, but they played the toughest schedule in the country. And you look at the overall talent they have, I think that Morgan coming back is huge for that defense.
Phil, you also brought up Jalen Catalon, another All-American on your list. And here's a guy that's undersized, coming out of Mansfield, and just really didn't get to play a lot under Chad Morris his freshman year, redshirted. Then now we saw him just burst onto the scene in the SEC. When you look at his skill set, when you look at some of the better secondary players that Arkansas has had over the years, like a Steve Atwater, what kind of role do you envision him having, not just for Arkansas, but in the SEC and college football this year?
You know, you look at Catalon, and he's like 5'10", 198 pounds, and you don't think he's going to be that physical and that intimidating, but he is. He's a very smart player, but he's also very physical. He'll throw his body in there, and you look at the fact he snagged 3 interceptions last year, is solid in coverage, and is a physical. So I think that he is one of the better strong safeties in the entire country, and that was as a redshirt freshman. He's just going to get bigger each year, and I think he's clearly one of the top. By the time he leaves Arkansas, which will probably be in 3 years, 2 more years, I think you're going to see him be one of the top strong safeties in the entire country.
Phil, still with us here on the Morning Rush. We've been spending some time talking about super seniors, these guys with the extra year of eligibility that came back and took advantage of that, and how, Morgan or maybe a Myron Cunningham on the offensive line, a few others may impact this Arkansas team. As you really do a deep dive around college football, is there a team that stands out that maybe will have an edge or an advantage because of that extra year with maybe a larger group or more impactful players? Is there anyone that stood out to you that this eligibility is going to mean more to them than maybe any other team?
Yeah, I think the one team that would probably stand out is first of all, let me tell you this. Going through the teams with the coaches this year, and I talked to about 110 of the 130 head coaches. Almost every one of them's like, "Damn, Phil, we're so experienced this year. We were able to run 3 teams in the spring," and it's pretty much everybody. You go to the Pac-12, for example. Colorado's got 16 returning starters this year. That's the second fewest in the Pac-12. Everybody's got 16, 17, 18, 19 starters coming back across the country because of the rule. What I look at is teams that maybe were inexperienced last year, and I think they'll make the biggest jumps, because if you were experienced last year, how much are you going to improve now that you're experienced again? So a team like LSU. LSU last year, they lost all those players to the sitting out the year and to the NFL, and they ended up with just 2 returning starters on offense, 3 on defense, and at one point they're 3-5. In fact, remember that Arkansas game, guys? Arkansas's defensive line was depleted. I thought LSU would be able to just roll over them, and Arkansas gave them a great game, and they barely pulled out a 3-point win in that one. So it wasn't an overwhelming LSU team. It's one that was fortunate to get to 500, but I think you're going to see a massive jump from LSU this year. They didn't lose their normal players to the NFL. They've got 18 returning starters as opposed to 5 last year, and I think they go from a team that barely made it to 5-5 to one that gets up to the double-digit wins like you're accustomed to.
Yeah. How difficult was evaluating last year? What different parameters did maybe you view last year with because of the COVID year? Did it change your view on how you would normally evaluate a team based on everything that was different last year?
Yeah, it did. And you didn't put as much weight into last year's numbers, especially you had to look at the games. Okay, how many players were available? You remember there were games last year where some teams had 40, 45 players available. Remember, as I mentioned, the Arkansas-LSU game, Arkansas had, 2 healthy defensive linemen for that game, and LSU just ran the ball down their throat most of the game and still didn't have the massive success that you would have thought. I think they ran it, 49 times. But when I look at some teams, going over with the coaches, a couple coaches are like, Phil, last year we were just lucky to play football. Don't put anything into last year's performance. I think you can glean a lot out of the teams that played a full season, and maybe we're close to 100%, but those teams that were really depleted last year, I don't think they're going to be as bad as they looked last season.
Phil, I know that you talked about football being 365 days a year. We're 68 days out from the first Arkansas football game when they take on Rice. Now, people are excited about that, but really excited about Week 2's matchup against Texas. When you look at the college football schedule this year, the big-time blue blood games that you're looking forward to, especially early on, Phil, what have you kind of honed in on in early college football games that you just can't miss out on?
Well, naturally, right out of the box, you're looking at Georgia against Clemson. I think that is could be a playoff elimination game, or a pre-playoff game because those two teams are both loaded. It's great to see that rivalry back, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. One game that probably won't be as interesting, but one I'm looking forward to watching is Oklahoma-Nebraska, and it's the 50th anniversary of that big Titanic battle when it was irresistible force versus immovable object. I think Oklahoma rolls over Nebraska this year, but it'll just be good to see that rivalry renew. Here's a sneaky one for you, though, and it comes early in the season. Cincinnati travels to face Notre Dame. Now, Cincinnati's fresh off a bye. Notre Dame's playing a fifth straight week just off of Wisconsin. And I think Cincinnati opens up the season in the AP top 10. If they can get past Indiana on the road, they'll still be in the top 10. And if they get past Notre Dame in South Bend, and Notre Dame's one of those inexperienced teams. They only have 9 returning starters. Since he's got 14, since he's got a veteran quarterback in Desmond Ridder, you may see a Cincinnati team, if they can run the table with wins over Indiana and Notre Dame this year, potentially make the playoff. Remember the game they gave Georgia last year. So I think nobody's really focusing in October 2nd, Cincinnati at Notre Dame, but that's one I'm really excited about.
Phil, is Fickell just waiting on that Ohio State job? I know Ryan Day, he's not going to be leaving anytime soon, but I know he's been linked to other jobs in the past, but he's an Ohio guy. Is he just waiting for that job in Columbus to pop open at some point?
You know, in talking to Coach Fickell each year, I get the gist he's very happy at Cincinnati right now. So, and now with this playoff opening up to 12 teams, he's got as good a shot at making the playoff at Cincinnati as he does anywhere else. I don't get the feel from him that he's looking elsewhere right now. But I tell you what, you want a hot coach, he's got to be the one that if some AD could pry him away from Cincinnati, they'd get the little star on their thing.
Phil, you put the teams in order when you go by conference, and in the Western Division, I was really surprised you had Alabama at 1. I'm sure that took weeks of analysis.
Big risk taker there.
I'm glad to see you stepped way out on the limb there. But how close was second place in the West? Because that seems like the interesting battle. A&M, LSU got some quality teams that are trying to be in that top 2, top 3 this year. How close are those battles in your opinion?
You know, and I'm actually going to say this. I think Texas A&M has a shot at Alabama. I wasn't bold enough to go ahead and forecast it this year, but when you look at Texas A&M, really the 2 question marks you have are the offensive line. They only have 1 starter back, but Jimbo Fisher's told me last year, he told me again this year, that he feels this year's offensive line is bigger, more physical, more athletic, and filled with more NFL guys than last year's offensive line. They're just not as experienced. But by the time they play Alabama, they'll have 5 games under their belt. And, as I mentioned, I like Haynes King. I think he could put up similar stats to Kellen Mond. They've got the best set of running backs in the country with Isaiah Spiller and the chain. Then you look at them defensively, they're loaded with Leal and Clemens and company. And last year, if you watched the Alabama-Texas A&M game, yeah, the final score was 52-24. But A&M was 1 play here, 1 play there, away from actually making a game of it. They got stopped on 4th down right before the half, gave up a touchdown. Had they got that first down, they would have been a 1-score game in the half, and I think it would have been a different game. They get them at home in College Station. So if anybody's going to knock off Alabama this year out of the West, it would be Texas A&M. I give them that shot. But A&M also has to play that LSU team on the road in Death Valley. And as I mentioned, I think LSU's probably a double-digit win team this season. You're going to see the biggest improvement out of them. And then you have to throw out Mississippi. I don't think anybody wants to play Ole Miss because Ole Miss last year gave Alabama that game. It was tied at 42-42 in the 4th quarter, and you're like, wow, what the heck is going on here? They are a team that's got the offense, and now with 9 starters back on that defensive side of the ball, I think you're going to actually see them play some good defense this year. So this is a very dangerous Ole Miss team.
Arkansas won 3 last year, had a chance to win a few more. Particularly, you look at the Auburn game, Missouri game. You mentioned the LSU game. You have them bringing up the rear in the SEC West. Why did you not feel this is the year Arkansas could maybe climb out of the bottom of the SEC West?
No, schedule, but, I'll tell you this. I think coming into last year, if you would have put the over-under win total, if you knew that Arkansas was going to play those 10 games, you put the over-under win total at 2, I think a lot of folks would have gone under, and as it was, Arkansas was an underdog in all 10 games last year, and yet won 3 of them. Hell, they were leading Georgia at the half. Auburn, they probably should have won that game. I'm still little confused at what happened there at the end. It sure looked like a fumble. And then you go to the other games we talked about. LSU, I thought, was a game where they surprised me by the game they played against LSU. The Missouri game, they thought they had won that one. This is a team that could have actually won 6 games last year, despite the fact they were an underdog in both. But the schedule did it. They have my number one most difficult schedule in the country. Not only are they playing in the SEC West, they draw Georgia out of the East. They also have to play Texas in a non-conference game, and so it's a brutal schedule. But after what I saw last year from Sam Pittman in Arkansas, they may be a dog in the majority of their games again this year. But I still think this is a team that steps on the field thinking they can beat anybody they play.
Phil, before we let you go, tell our listeners, tell our audience how they can purchase the 2021 college football preview.
Hey, I appreciate that. It's available right now at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. If you go to your local Barnes & Noble, local Books A Million, that's your best way to get it, because you get it in your hands today. There's no shipping cost or anything like that. If you go to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, they don't have it, which they should. You can't order it online. You just go to philsteele.com. That's STEELE.com. When you go there, we ship it out 2-day FedEx. And so you should have it in your hands in 2 to 3 days, once we get it processed and everything. But it's philsteele.com. But your best bet, head to your local Barnes & Noble, head to your local Books A Million, and scoop one up. 352 pages. Guys, I feel it's got 3 to 4 times the amount of information in any other college football preview. What do you guys think?
Well, I don't know of one that's been more thorough over the last couple of decades than yours. So I don't know when you ever get any downtime. It seems like it'd take 2 years to put together one book. So.
Yeah, about 7.5 months. So it's a long process, and then boom, football season starts. So it's a lot. It's a labor of love, though, guys. A labor of love.
It's what's the old adage? You don't have to work a day in your life if you love what you do. Well, Phil, I know you love what you do, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your morning to join us to get people jazzed up for the 2021 college football season.
Hey, a lot of fun talking football with you guys this morning. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.